Hello, and welcome to Care Partner Q&A Mondays at the Inspired Memory Care Education, Training, and Resource Center at the 80th Street Residence. Hi, I'm Nettie Harper, and I'm here today with
Kelly Gilligan.
And we're coming to you live from the Upper East Side of Manhattan, where our organization, Inspired Memory Care, collaborates with a vibrant community of individuals living with Alzheimer's disease and related dementias and their care partners in care. We have both worked with individuals living with dementia in our personal and professional lives for over 20 years and have found our passion in the challenge, growth, and hope that can spring from the bonds we forge and maintain during the process of caring through cognitive change. It's been our experience that great care partners persevere through the struggles by having a team of like-minded individuals to be creative with and to lead on. We also know from experience that key education about cognitive change comes not only from research and experts, but from the people who are living with it. Kelly?
So every week we meet here at the 80th Street Residence with our team of professional and family care partners and with the residents who live here. They give us focus groups, pilot testing, and feedback and keep us grounded. They let us know when we're on the right track or also on the wrong track. It's our pleasure to present Care Partner Q&A Mondays as an initiative of the Education, Training, and Resource Center here at the 80th Street Residence. Please, if you have a topic that you're interested in discussing with us or learning more about, type it in the comments section or feel free to email us at info@inspiredmemorycare.com. Again, that's info@inspiredmemorycare.com. Today's topic of conversation is I want to go home. How to support individuals living with dementia through distressing statements. And we're going to talk a lot today about speaking in a little bit of a different language than possibly you're used to. So saddle up and we'll be ready to roll.
So in today's presentation, we'll talk about the following. Why a person might be asking to go home, even when he or she is already home. And then the how to respond empathetically and compassionately. And then the what to do moving forward to minimize or prevent reoccurrences of distress. Kelly and I had the opportunity to reach out to some of our care partners that we work with for what they are hearing from their loved ones when their loved ones are in a state of distress. Care partners joining us today, these may sound very familiar to you. What they shared with us is that they're hearing statements like, "Where's my mother?" Or, "I need to pick up my kids." Or, "No, I don't live here." And of course, the old too familiar, "I want to go home." And they're already in their home. Clearly, all of these statements are very distressing to hear for a family care partner. And then how do we respond may cause you as the care partner a lot of anxiousness. You are not alone. This is a very delicate situation and it is not always easy to know how to respond because there's not just one solution that fits each person. Why? Because we are all unique individuals and we have different needs, we have different thoughts, and we have different emotions occurring. So where do we go from here? Kelly?
So if we look at our development as human beings kind of across the lifespan, we have unmet needs throughout the course of that lifespan. And at different stages of the lifespan, we have the ability to meet our own needs differently. So if we consider unmet needs and changes in how the brain of a person living with cognitive change can process environmental stimuli, we have a better chance of supporting that person to feel more engaged, more fulfilled, and more comfortable in the moment. Doing this, meeting those unmet needs, can cut down on repetitive questions or distressing questions. And when I say distressing questions, Nettie and I mean a question that's indicating distress on the part of the person, and that's also causing you possibly some distress as a care partner. At the physiological level, our unmet needs might include food, water, sleep, or rest for our body. Sometimes our body becomes overstimulated and it's hard to relax. a need to go to the bathroom, and some people really need privacy in order to do that, or even pain. At the safety level, we might be looking for a sense of security and control over our surroundings or the people in our surroundings. I mention overstimulation because for the brain of an individual living with cognitive change, it can be very hard to focus on more than one sense at a time. It can be focused to tune out kind of white noise and background stimuli that you and I can filter out. And so that can result in a state of almost hypervigilance where I don't know what to focus on and my brain is trying to do many, many different tasks at once unsuccessfully. And a person's tolerance for that level of stimulation can also change throughout the day. Frequently later in the day, we hear that sundowner syndrome. Later in the day, our brains might be a little bit more fatigued and unable to process the stimuli the same way they can in the morning. So how I'm responding to my environment can change from day to day, hour to hour, and even minute to minute. Another thing that can trigger an individual to feel unsafe in a surrounding environment can be seeing strange faces or seeing people that are unfamiliar, seeing things that are unfamiliar. And so sometimes even just a change to the home environment can trigger that I need to get home. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in more depth as we go on. Next, if we're looking at this kind of hierarchy of human needs, we see the love and belonging level, and that's where I need to feel a sense of connection to the people around me, to the place that's around me, to the groups around me, and I need that sense of comfort and I belong here. This is where I'm supposed to be. And so again, accomplishing that for an individual living with cognitive change can take a bit more creativity sometimes. And then the next level, at the esteem level, all of us want to feel that we're in charge, we're respected, we're heard, that we have skills, and that we're contributing. And so again, if home is a place where I mowed the lawn, or home is a place where I cooked the meals, throughout my lifespan, I may still be looking for that sense of control, esteem, and contribution to the family. And so that's kind of tied into looking for home. And then finally, self-actualization, where home might be where I'm living to my highest potential, where I feel creative, and again, where I feel that I have the things around me that bring kind of creative meaning to my life. So one of the examples that I know Nettie encountered recently with a new client was he was moved into an assisted living, and he said, I need to get home. And Nettie said, you know, what's home to you? And he said, home is where I have my orchids. And for any of you on the call right now that have ever attempted to grow orchids, you know that the ability to nurture and grow orchids is it's beyond skill, it's beyond esteem if you can keep orchids alive. And the joy that this gentleman got from the beauty of the orchids and from the nurturing of the orchids really transcended even just an esteem level.
I'm still trying to learn from him on how to care for an orchid, though. I'm not a very good student.
That 3 ice cube rule, I don't know about that. I think that's oversimplified.
I will continue to be the student. He's an excellent teacher.
Yeah.
All right. So the other thing that we want to talk about today is these are some of the strategies that we're going to explore. We're going to talk a little bit about centering, observing, asking exploratory questions, validating statements, and creating meaningful and enriching activity or rhythm-based adjustments. Because today is not about just saying what all the problems are, but we want to, equip you with some solutions in exploring with your loved one on how to kind of minimize some of these distressing behaviors and really get to what are they truly trying to express. And that way we can have more of a meaningful connection with them as well.
Absolutely. I think what we hear a lot is redirect, keep them distracted. Keeping an individual distracted is not necessarily going to get to the heart of what their unmet need is. And so we need to go a little deeper than that, Nettie. So I'm glad that you're kind of bringing that up. A couple of the techniques, Nettie mentioned centering, and having real presence when you're working with an individual living with cognitive change is important. It's kind of like tuning into a radio station. It's having that ability to drown out things in your life that are white noise, or in your environment that are white noise, and truly focusing your mind and your attention on the person in front of you. Before you can do that, you do need to kind of have mindfulness of your own needs and what you're bringing to the interaction as well. And I know Eddie and I were just talking with a professional care partner who was mentioning the effect of the environment that she was working in on her need to center and be present. And so it's very, very important to take that time to check in with yourself and really make sure that you're doing what you need to do for yourself in order to gain this presence. And it's okay to grant yourself that opportunity for a little bit of self-care. And we'll talk more about that. Then as you get to the interaction, you want to really observe what are the nuances in your loved one or in your family member's body language. What is the actual emotion that's being expressed? Sometimes when we're working with someone who has a change to their facial expressions or their ability to communicate through their face, we really need to be tuned into the jawline. We need to be tuned into possibly other features of the face that are not other features of the face that are more expressive than the traditional features. So really taking that moment to observe is important. And then for yourself, as I mentioned, you might want to think about breathing exercises. You might want to think about stretching. I know recently Nettie's way of grounding herself has been to give herself a little bit of a scalp massage, which she's really been enjoying these days. But it takes about 2 or 3 minutes, and it really awakens your senses, and it can help with that practice of mindfulness that I think we're touching on. Also, doing this can support you to see differently. So I'm mentioning observation of your loved one or of your family member. Beyond that, seeing big picture, seeing things through a different lens can be really useful. Sometimes when we're kind of down in the trenches of doing the care and doing all of the tasks throughout the day, we forget to kind of step back and look big picture. What is the week looking like with my loved one? What is the day looking like with my loved one? What has this month been like with my loved one? And in looking through that different lens, we see things very differently. So taking that moment is important. If you are experiencing major deficits in your time, in your energy levels, and I think a lot of us are certainly going through this, it might be an opportunity, it might be necessary to look for some additional support. And support doesn't always come in the form of paid support. It may come in a relationship that hasn't been tapped yet, but that has potential for support. It might be through the church, it might be through a different neighborhood organization that you haven't thought of. And again, taking that minute to really think things through, or taking that moment to really think things through about what is available and how can I get the help that I need is crucial. The other piece of that, of course, is you may need to set some boundaries. It may be time to start saying no to certain things that are a strain on your time and energy. And Nettie and I say that because when we look at both our experience and what the research indicates for caregivers, burden, that feeling of burden and the feeling of depression can cause situations in the home or cause interactions to escalate unnecessarily. Sometimes it's the stress that's cumulative, that's building up. Nettie and I kind of talk about during this time of isolation, we read an article about what's called a social allergen, where it's that thing that shouldn't bother you, but you're exposed to it over and over and over and over again until finally you develop an allergy to it and you can't take it anymore. And those social allergens occur even without the complications of cognitive change. So you really want to look at how do I build an opportunity for myself to step away so that the allergens are not developing. If that doesn't happen and caregiver burden increases and you really fall into a depression, it can result in premature institutionalization of your loved one. It can have negative health outcomes for you. So it's very, very important to, I hate to use this term, but proverbially bite the bullet, so that you can really achieve presence and a deeper level of connection with your loved one again. That connection and those positive interactions are what are going to help keep you going and keep him or her going as well. Okay.
Thanks, Kelly.
All right, next.
So one of the other things that we want to look at is we need to observe what's going on, observe verbal cues, observe nonverbal cues, and observe patterns. So going a little bit more into that, I'm actually going to share an example of a client that I partnered with many years ago. And I think it really captures all three of these. And so there was a gentleman who lived in an assisted living, and I was brought in to consult with him and his family and the care team. And what I was told is he is extremely agitated, aggressive, and he goes and he pounds on everyone's door and he's screaming and he's yelling. And he was on the verge of being evicted. And he was in a memory care community at that time. So I was a bit surprised, but again, who knows what's going on? So, you know, you leave your judgments at the door and we move forward. And so as I'm moving forward, I'm asking and doing some inquiry, and I'm noticing that the care teams, during the day, everything's fine with the freshening up process. The recreation teams are saying he's a delight to have around. The dietary team, the management, housekeeping, everyone is just saying he's a wonderful delight, and they just don't understand what everyone else is talking about. When I see everyone else, I'm like, well, who's everyone if I'm being brought in? Turned out it was really that evening shift that was coming in. And so I said, well, that's very interesting. So now I'm picking up that there's a bit of a pattern. The evening shift is noticing something. However, the night shift and the day shift and other departments are not noticing. It was really the home health aides, the CNAs, that were noticing a bit of a pattern. So what I did is I started arranging my visits when I would come in to consult. I would arrange a little bit before the day shift would leave and then stay a couple hours into the evening shift. And when I say evening shift, their shift started around 3. And so I would come in usually around 2 o'clock. And so I would be there from about 2 to 5, just to kind of see, maybe I can see what the pattern is that they're seeing. So what I started seeing is another pattern with the care team. And that pattern was somewhere around 2 and 2:30, and sometimes later at 3, I would start to see that everyone was rounding up all their belongings. They were going to their refrigerators, they were grabbing their lunch bags, they were going to their lockers, they were grabbing their coats, they were grabbing hats, scarves, all kinds of things. I went during the winter time, and in New York City, we certainly have, sorry, Kelly. So then I started noticing there's also a bit of a pattern with the care team. So I started seeing that, you know, around like maybe 2:15, 2:30, they were going to the refrigerator, they were going to their lockers, they were putting on their scarves, they were putting on their jackets, and then they're kind of sitting around, and there's more chatter going on too about what they're going to do when they go home and things like that. And I'm like, there's more activity, but it's more activity with the staff that's chatting. And they're also, the recreation team didn't have a program going on at that time. And the residents were, you know, watching some just TV that was on. It was various things. Sometimes it might have been a movie, sometimes it might have been the news, whatever it may have been. And so there wasn't true engagement and socialization going on, except for amongst the team members, there was some social engagement. And so I started watching this gentleman, and as the activities started kind of, you know, ramping up, he started ramping up. And so then what I started noticing is he was trying to get in and out of the rooms, because what he's doing is he's taking the cues, the nonverbal cues from the staff, because they were setting the nonverbal cues. They got their coats, they got their scarves, they got their hats. They actually cued him, it's time to go. He read their cues. Then he started hearing, oh, I'm going to go home. Oh, goodbye. Because then what happens as the shift coming in, the shift leaving was saying goodbye. So naturally, it was time for him to say goodbye as well. The other thing I started looking at is his background history. He was a teacher for many years. And right around that shift change, his body was feeling like, okay, that's the natural time to go home. So everything made sense. And the reason why we started noticing the pacing started increasing, because nobody was looking at, hey, he's reading our verbal and nonverbal cues. We haven't addressed his distress, which his distress was, why isn't anybody paying attention to me? I need to go home too. And where are my belongings? They're missing. And I'm getting locked up. I'm going to be locked up here. So this isn't okay. So again, not being able to process everything that's going on, he's flipping it and he's becoming in extreme distress. So yes, was the team speaking the truth that he was agitated? He was becoming aggressive. And yeah, I even heard he was a bear to deal with. So what they were speaking of was absolutely completely accurate, but what we absolutely missed was his verbal cues and the nonverbal cues that, yes, he gave off, but we gave off those patterns and nonverbal cues and verbal cues first. So he was just reading us and, by the way, acting very appropriately. So he responded to us. So we have to be very careful. And that's why observation is so extremely important. And with that observation, we were able to put things in place to minimize that distress. And the simple thing that we were able to do is, again, look at his history. He was a very intellectual man, and he was a very just kind of a passive man, and he wasn't really into group activities and things like that. But what he did like to do is he liked to read his newspaper after he came home from work. And so we were able to find that information out from his family. And so when we found this out, we were simply able to do the following. We were able to create a quiet space for him to go to, and we had newspaper waiting for him. He would simply able to open the door, walk right into a comfy chair, pick up the newspaper, he started reading. He didn't once see that any staff were leaving. He didn't hear any goodbyes. He was completely content and in his space and in his comfort. So again, his wanting to go home, it made sense to the environment that he was in. So we need to be aware of the environment. Is it creating the distress of I want to go home? And can we simply change what we're doing, or can we simply change the environment to help the person with their distress and either minimize the distress, or in this case, we were able to eliminate it completely. Kelly, any thoughts on that?
I think that what you're mentioning is really fantastic. And it applies in many, many different situations. Certainly, a person's routine prior to the onset of their cognitive change can influence their behavioral patterns. And so I think that's important for family partners to know about as well. Also, journals and logs can be really useful for family care partners for identifying patterns, and also identifying patterns in their own behavior, in their own kind of thought processes. So if you're not already utilizing a care partner journal or keeping kind of a log surrounding when these challenging behaviors occur, you might want to consider doing that. The more data you have, the better an opportunity to identify a pattern you have as well.
Okay. And Kelly, just on those journals and the logs, I think it's important to realize that, you know, we're not expecting a whole book, but It's important that, there's a lot of, in most cases, there's a lot of people that are contributing to the care team and the support of your loved one. So getting everybody's input, and that's why it was so important in this situation. We had 3 different shifts and we had many people that contributed to this care team. So being able to ask the inquiry questions, if we had had a bit of a log or a journal, it could have cut the time of me going in to do the consult. And it's not about my time, but it was about this man being in distress for a longer period of time. And that journal would have cut that time. So thank you for mentioning the journal and the log. So, so important.
And then the other thing that you can do, and frequently we kind of, when we're met with a statement that's very off-putting, like, where is my mother, from somebody whose mom maybe has been gone for a long period of time, or where is my husband? And I know for family members, if husband is your dad and you know your dad's been gone, that can be emotional for you too. So this part is a little bit challenging because we have knee-jerk responses when people ask those types of questions. And if you've ever heard people talk about cognitive change and how to respond, it's the kind of cliche is join their reality, go with the flow. I think that there is something to be said for meeting the person in their reality and meeting them where they're at. But we also need to look at the brain is a very complex thing, and it operates on many, many different cylinders and through many different neural pathways. And so a person may, on one level, understand that their husband is gone, and on another level, be expecting him to walk in the door at any moment. And that's one of the nuances to living with cognitive change, is that we can kind of have these like multiple layers of awareness or multiple layers of consciousness. And sometimes we're kind of moving in and out of a bit of a fog. So it's important to ask questions that will help gain insight and perspective into where the mindset of the person is. These types of questions that we're going to talk about can also help them to clarify in their own mind and gain a picture of what it is that they're seeking. And they can also just support trust, emotional connection, and the feeling of being heard and close to a loved one, which is a very validating feeling. Sometimes when people are making these statements and they feel either condescended to, or they feel like they're being dismissed, or they may feel they may be aware that they're not quite on track, and when they receive a comment or changing the subject or an avoidance, they feel a little bit dismissed or alone and isolated. And so you could be right there in the room and giving your fullest attention, but if we don't navigate these conversations carefully, they may not feel that full presence from you. So a couple of exploratory questions, and this is where I mentioned in the beginning, kind of speaking a little bit of a different language. There is a wonderful, wonderful woman out there. Her name is Naomi Feil, and she founded a method called Validation Method. And validation really gives a framework for how to communicate through these tough conversations. What I want to focus on are some of the questions she encourages for exploration. And so the very first one, it's very open-ended. If you have a loved one who has speech, even if it's halting speech, even if they have trouble finding their words, try asking, tell me more. If your loved one says, I haven't seen your father in a long time, you might say, Mom, it sounds like you're really thinking about Dad right now. Tell me more. And then just pause and see what your mom can share about what she's thinking about Dad. And it can be very enlightening to understand what the perspective of the individual is about the scenario. Sometimes they go in a completely different direction than you expected them to go. And then to kind of support, you might ask questions that are sensory based. For instance, when I have somebody asking to go home and they're in their home and I want to get a picture of what home might they be talking about, I may say, tell me more about home. Is it very big or very small? If they're looking for their children, are they tall? Are they still small children? Tell me more about your kids. Okay. Is there ever a time when is one of those questions that's designed to help give insight into how a person might be better able to cope? So, is there ever a time when you've been separated from your husband before? What kinds of things did you do to pass the time? Is there ever a time when you aren't missing your husband? Okay. And that kind of question, again, if they say, well, I don't miss him when I'm out with my girlfriends, then that gives us some idea of where we might want to go with engagement. And then sometimes I'll hear family members say, well, I ask her about it and I let her talk about it, and she's very repetitive. She says the same thing over and over again, and she gets stuck in a loop. And that's where this next question, what is the best part or what is the worst part, can help. And I've used this with people, and Nettie and I kind of joke, because if ever I miss my husband, this will be the thing that people should ask me, what's the best part about your husband? And I can guarantee you I'll go on for a very long time because he's a very wonderful man. And then if they ask me what the worst part about being married to my husband is, I will have a very quick answer that will have people laughing, and it's he never does dishes and he can be a bit of a slob. So Ryan, if you're watching right now, you better start doing the dishes. But that's a very quick way to kind of get me to pivot and not necessarily be so stuck in the emotion of sadness and missing. It brings a little bit of humor to the scenario very often, and it can give you that moment to pivot. So that's what those types of questions, those exploratory questions, are all about. And yeah.
I just want to mention, because I know we do a lot of education with home health aides and social workers and nurses and so forth. And sometimes when we talk about these questions, they'll say, but, they get very emotional. Yeah. Emotions are okay. We need to get these feelings out. And so often, because I know you mentioned earlier, we hear the word redirection. So often we're in a hurry. And so the first thing that people want to do is redirect us, redirect us, redirect us. And we're not getting deep into our feelings, and we don't have the opportunity to express our feelings. Instead, we're said, would you like a cup of coffee or would you like some ice cream? That's not helping my feelings. It may, after I'm able to express my feelings, then bring out the ice cream. Oreos for me, as you know. But these questions allow us the opportunity to express. And I think that's really important, that when we start these types of questions, don't get worried if you start to see some emotions that, yes, they might be joyful emotions, but we also might have some tearful emotions as well. But that's also, go ahead.
Sorry, Nettie. And even angry emotions, right?
Yes, yes. But I was going to say, but that's what starts to build the trust. And that's when you start to see the distressing behaviors start to minimize. And that's what we're trying to get to. They start to bond with you. They start to trust you. And then you might also see them open up a little bit more and have a conversation.
Absolutely. And so again, if you want to learn more about validation method, we highly recommend looking up Naomi Feil. She is an incredible pioneer in the industry of caring for people with cognitive change.
Absolutely.
Okay, so after creating that space and that opportunity for the person to our impulse as loving, caring human beings is to fix. Or to join the person oh, I felt that way before too, or I understand. It's important not to fall into that trap, because we don't necessarily understand. We haven't had the identical experience that the individual we're partnered with has. And as Nettie said, giving the freedom to express not only positive emotions, but also traditionally negative emotions, not that any emotion is positive or negative, but you know what we're saying. It's not always going to be clean and happy. And so some validating statements that you might want to consider using as a follow-up are, I'm sorry that, okay? And Nettie and I often talk about using I'm sorry or using the apology in a situation. Many people can feel very accused, or they feel like I can't do anything right and she's always going to find something wrong with what I do, or he's always going to have something to complain about. Giving that apology for the situation is not necessarily owning that you did something wrong. And so often using "I'm sorry" is just a good way to de-escalate and kind of soothe a little bit. So "I'm so sorry that you're going through this. I'm so sorry if I did XYZ thing." Again, it can kind of just bring everything down and settle for a little bit. I don't blame you for feeling that way. That's one of the ones that I really feel is a huge trust builder. I think a lot of folks feel very judged in their emotions, or if a care partner or another individual is feeling frustrated, they may say, "Oh, you shouldn't feel that way," and then try to do the redirection, as Nettie mentioned, or they may say, "I never did." Okay, let's not look at the actions. Let's look at the emotions. I don't blame you for feeling that way. Okay, and it's not about what the reality is. It's about their perspective and interpretation of reality. I hear what you're saying. I see what you're saying. I feel what you're saying. Those are, again, those kinds of sensory words and word senses that a person might communicate through. And then also there's just good old music. So if the person's less verbal, it might be connecting through a song about the theme of what they're saying, or a song that communicates emotion. It may be through motion. I know that there have been many wonderful validating experiences of people kind of mirroring each other in a task and communicating through gestures. Or it may even just be through touch. And Naomi Feil has some really interesting interpretations of symbolic touches that can be used to help a person feel validated in emotion. So all of those are options for kind of creating that connection and really bringing a gentler close to the interaction. Okay. Nettie, do you want to talk about the role of meaningful engagement in validation and in kind of meeting these unmet needs?
So when we're looking at distressing behaviors, and Kelly and I have worked with many clients where it comes to they're missing opportunities for meaningful engagement. And some of this centers around meaningful engagement with other people, such as children, as you see this sweet moment in this picture. And some of it may just be, just having a sense of purpose again. Not everyone loves the group activities. Some people need individual activities, as the gentleman I spoke to you about earlier. And then also Kelly spoke about the gentleman I worked with that, home to him meant, caring for, orchids. So we need to figure out, how can we bring these meaningful experiences to their life, and not just once a month? How can we bring it to them as often as they need it? So caring for the orchids, that was something he needed meaning in his life every day. He wanted to wake up to that orchid every morning. So also we have many people that want some type of family involvement every day. So how can we do that? Family can't always visit, and certainly right now during this physical distancing that some people are going through, it doesn't mean that you have to social distance. There are other ways that we can communicate with our family members. Kelly and I have been speaking to family members about going back to the old ways of snail mail, sending photos back and forth, writing letters back and forth. And if you have the means of viewing technology, you can also get on Zoom, you can get on FaceTime and see each other's faces and experience it that way. But certainly we've got to have meaningful engagement, and that helps with a lot of this distressing moments that some of your loved ones are having. But we have to figure out, what is it that they want? And so Kelly and I also have an opportunity to figure out through our consults of, what do they still have a passion about? So really explore that with your loved one. And it may be that they're not able to do some of the things that they used to be, or maybe they can if we adapt it in a different kind of way. So Kelly, one of the things that we hear often is they used to be an avid reader, but they can't do it anymore. There's so many adapted reading materials, and once we bring reading back into their life, all of a sudden they're coming alive again. And so if you're interested in adapted reading materials, shoot us an email, let us know, or type in the comment box here. We'll send you some links and we'll get that information over to you. But again, there's so many resources that are out there. We also, on our website, I think we should mention this, Kelly, during this time of COVID-19, we've been asked, for resources on, engagement opportunities during this time so that people aren't isolated. So on our website, on the welcome page, we actually have a section COVID-19, and we have a resource list. So tap into that resource list, and we believe in a lot of free things that are out there, especially right now, since a lot of people are struggling. So you'll see that we list a lot of free resources out there. So please go to our website, and we'll mention that again. It's inspiredmemorycare.com. And so again, creating meaningful engagement really certainly helps with a lot of these distressing behaviors. And Kelly?
Absolutely. And just also taking that opportunity to think about what will be meaningful and what will fill that unmet need. There was a gentleman that I was working on a transition with, and he was transitioning to a memory care neighborhood. And in his case, he had actually transitioned from a farm, and it was a huge farm with a ton of land and many, many animals on the farm. And he unfortunately was no longer able to care for them independently. And so you can imagine the tremendous change of living on a large plot of land with many animals to moving into an apartment. That's a tremendous transition to ask somebody to go through. And so he would try to leave to go back to his farm. And whenever anybody asked him, where he was going when he tried to leave, he'd say, I have to go home. I'm going home. I have to go home. I have to get back to the farm. And asking him what his biggest concern was on the farm, he knew his animals had been taken by neighbors and that the neighbors were caring for them, but he still said to me, I need to care for my animal. I need to care for my animals. And so he had that kind of multiple level of consciousness. He knew what his need was in terms of that role, but he also knew that the animals were cared for. And so what ended up really supporting his transition was we got a small rabbit in the assisted living, and it became this gentleman's job to care for the rabbit. He did a beautiful job. It was one of the best cared for rabbits I've ever seen. And through caring for the rabbit, that was meaning for him. He had another living thing that was tangible and that made sense for him to care for. And through caring for the rabbit, he also started to interact with other peers because they naturally had this curiosity about this man that had a rabbit. And the rabbit was adorable. Her name was Daisy. And he would move about the residence with the rabbit, and people could pet the rabbit. And he kind of became the pet therapist on top of caring for the pet. So it created this new role for him in this new job that was very real and very meaningful. And I think when we look at engagement, we need to ask, what is the purpose of this? What need are we meeting for the individual, and what real sense of meaning are they getting out of this? How is it contributing to their quality of life? So when we can kind of cover those bases, that's when we have real success.
And Kelly, I just want to mention, not only did the residents, really bond and learn a lot about rabbits, a lot about Carl as well, but the team members saw him through a different lens.
100%.
Yeah. Instead of this man that's always trying to escape, right? It was a man who was caring about these animals. And then all of a sudden they saw this human being with just such love and genuine, just a caring human being. And then they also took an interest in the rabbit for a very first time. And I have to mention, it was always a lovely moment when I got to visit that assisted living, because I had never, had a rabbit. And so he would teach me so much about rabbits. And I remember I would show up with a book. I was like, is this the right book on how to raise a rabbit? So it just really became a project that we all had together.
Everyone had a stake. We were all stakeholders in that project. And I think what was wonderful too, when you're bringing up so many good memories for me, when the staff got used to, we had a lot of staff that were not used to having pets in the home. We would every once in a while, when somebody was having a tough day, catch them on the floor of the hallway with the rabbit, having their own kind of pet therapy. And so again, it really just brought the entire community to life, and it was a problem that ended up just having this wonderful, beautiful solution.
Absolutely.
I always
Yeah.
feel grateful when I think of him.
Thank you
All
for
right.
sharing that.
Of course. Thanks for reminding me. In terms of Nettie, do you want to talk about rhythm and kind of the way to build a rhythm and why it's helpful?
Sure, sure. And so one of the best ways to get ahead of those unmet needs that, Kelly spoke about in the beginning is to develop a therapeutic routine that anticipates those needs and meets them proactively. Like for the gentleman I spoke about who was the teacher and that was living in the assisted living, when I was able to see that, if we got ahead of it and we invited him into this room where he could simply read his newspaper, which is kind of been his routine all his life. So once we were proactive, we got ahead of the distressing behavior. It just didn't even exist anymore. So think proactively to try to meet those unmet needs. And so this can actually help to minimize the times that a care partner has to de-escalate a situation. It also builds continuity and expectation for both care partners so that they are not trying to problem solve and improvise in the moment. Another key consideration is for creating rhythm is gaining buy-in from both care partners so that there's a natural motivation to engage. Ensure that these opportunities balance exertion and rest so that person's energy levels are sustained and cognition is optimized throughout the day. So one of the things that I always think of is, you know, I understand that everyone is really interested in, assisted livings and independent senior livings and so forth. Like, what does the recreation look like and so forth? And we have to have activities all through the day. But keep in mind that there is a natural body rhythm where we do need some relaxation. So you really have to incorporate, a natural rhythm. So looking at some relaxation programs as well, or even incorporating a nap. So naps are okay too. We just need to make sure that we're not napping all day. Okay, Kelly?
Okay. And so Nettie and I want to thank you for joining us today. We hope that this segment was meaningful to you and that it gave some insight or some fresh inspiration or ideas. To connect with, please feel free, by the way, to type your questions, comments, concerns in the chat box. We are here to respond to those. And if you'd like to connect with us or submit a question for a segment moving forward, please feel free to visit our website. That's www.inspiredmemorycare.com. I know Nettie also mentioned that we do have the resource list under our COVID-19 section. We also have links to our YouTube channel, which has some interactive opportunities on there as well. You can feel free to call us, email us, follow us on social media. Again, check out our YouTube channel, search Inspired Memory Care. And also, if you'd like to learn more about the 80th Street Residents, which is our partner organization and where we do the majority of our training and our research, we would invite you to visit their website at www.80thstreetresidents.com to learn more about them. Here next week, same time, same place, Monday at 3 o'clock to discuss communicating creatively. We look forward to seeing you then. Thanks.
Thank you. See you then. Stay inspired.